Hey there, welcome to the AI Chicks, where we're providing you cool conversations about AI for all, with each episode covering a different topic on how AI is impacting your and our daily lives. I'm your host, Aisha Corpas Wynn, always coming in fun and hot with that fun, unique perspective on tech. And like always, I got my bestie by my side.
Yes, I'm Lana Hout, and I'm bringing the curls, the charisma, and that entrepreneurial energy.
Y'all, this is truly an exciting favorite episode for us. We are doing a special media partnership with TechCon conference. They handle a lot of these premier AI and tech conferences across the US. And we are featuring in this episode one of their premier panelists, Delilah Panio, who is the VP of US Capital Formations at the Toronto Stock Exchange. Hey there, Delilah.
Hey there. It's so great to be with you ladies today. This is going to be a really exciting conversation. I'm super stoked.
We are super stoked as well. Today, we are getting into what are we tackling, Lana?
The AI gold rush.
That's right.
Yeah, funding and scaling beyond VC.
Yes, we've had some other episodes, Delilah, about wealth management, VC, and AI, but I love that you have the knowledge that's beyond VC. So with that said, tell our listeners and audience a little bit more about your background.
Absolutely. Again, such a pleasure to be here. So I uniquely work for Toronto Stock Exchange, one of the top 10 exchanges in the world, but I do that here from Southern California. So a very smart Canadian who finds winter unnecessary and gets to do my job by the beach. And so I have the pleasure and honor of meeting U.S. CEOs and investors looking for their options for raising that critical growth capital. And at TSX Venture Exchange, we just have a unique value proposition for U.S. companies that are looking sort of for that alternative to venture capital, would benefit from being a public company, and we can get into that more in the session, and really are looking to build a real company long-term and take it to NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange one day. And we are a brilliant stepping stone for a lot of those companies, as we are really good at early stage public companies, or what we call public venture capital.
Can you talk a little bit about the specific industries that you tend to work with?
Well, as you know, in the markets, it depends on what is happening in the markets today. And so not surprising, what's happening in the Canadian markets, like the US markets, are really globally. There has been a significant interest by public investors in what's happening in all these new tech frontiers, whether it's AI or quantum computing, or et cetera. While TSX and TSX Venture Exchange are certainly known globally for our mining franchise, and we are certainly continue to be very proud of that. We've been doing listing mining and energy companies for over 175 years. And so, but in the last 25 years, there's been obviously a massive shift towards innovation. And so that includes, we had the cannabis boom, we had, the crypto, and now it's a lot of AI and quantum. And of course, mining and critical minerals is becoming even more important, because that's actually what's fueling a lot of the reality of the tools we're using in technology. And so our market and our investors in our market are certainly benefiting from some of those great trends in the public markets.
There's various people who think that this AI rush and boom is temporary. Mm-hmm. For us that are really in the marketplace, we know that it is not. It's becoming more of a movement, a revolution, an era. It's here to stay. And so with everyone talking about AI, that is obviously a new staple. But where you sit in the capital market space, what is actually getting investors excited versus what just feels like hype?
Yeah, really great question. And we're certainly seeing it, again, across all markets around the world. And I'd say, first of all, a couple of things. There's a distinction between retail investors and institutional investors, right? So the retail investors are looking for that latest trend that they can, get in on, and hopefully, realize some value as the stock, ideally moves up. And then there are institutional investors that are investing for the longer term and really are trying to make those bets on what companies are going to be around, in a year, let alone 5 years. And so I think that, a lot of what's getting more of the investors, today compared to a year ago with all the hype of AI is things around like proven unit economics and defensibility, right? So those companies that are solving what we call the boring but the expensive problems, right? So whether that's anything around supply chain issues or clearing and settlement in the markets or whatever it is, but there is a real interest in the pure play AI companies. So first of all, what is that, right? There's been a lot of companies that, is this real AI? Is it just using AI to make a better business, right? Which all companies have to be looking at, obviously. But then it's those that are also what we call in the picks and shovels business, right? So all the infrastructure around the AI. So a lot of funding is going, again, whether it's critical minerals, data centers, infrastructure. I'll talk about a couple of those companies later on the TSX, but those companies are really what's getting, investors excited.
Simply using, we use AI doesn't seem like it's enough anymore. Or in your thoughts, has the market matured in what they're deeming as value in AI and investing?
Absolutely. And, as someone who sees like a lot of pitches, like a lot of pitch decks and a lot of presentations, both on the public side and on the private side, everyone is just throwing AI in their deck just to say, hey, we're an AI company, right? But investors are sophisticated enough to know the market has definitely matured enough to know that we're beyond what we call the show me era. And we're now really in, it's beyond that I use AI for my business and that I'm actually, embedding it into my business to make it better, to make it have that competitive edge, which every company has to be doing. But if you're presenting yourself as a pure AI play company, then you really need to know what that is and be that, because investors now, they definitely know. It's not like, back then we were just using the internet. Everyone's using the internet. So everyone is using AI. And if you're not using AI, you're going to be in trouble, likely with your business. But investors are now looking for, again, those pure play AI, like how is AI actually significantly disrupting the industry that they're playing in? And then again, anything around the infrastructure around supporting the reality of the new world that we're in, whether it's as consumers or businesses or in the markets or wherever, to help improve AI access and then also improve AI in terms of just, how we're running our lives and how we're running our businesses.
So are you saying that investors are putting more emphasis on companies that have native AI to their business, not just, hey, you have a bunch of subscriptions to all these other AI platforms?
Yeah, because that becomes a standard then.
Yeah.
It's definitely becoming a standard. And also the key, though, is just to be clear with what your business is, right? What the value proposition is and how you're using AI, or is it native AI, or are you in the infrastructure around AI? So just really being clear in your value proposition to investors.
So Delilah, here at the AI Chicks, we have AI's take. Today, we went to Copilot and heard what Copilot has to say about the AI gold rush.
According to Copilot, the AI gold rush is shifting from quick VC bets to massive, infrastructure-heavy investments that only the most prepared companies can sustain. As models grow larger and compute demands skyrocket, scaling AI now requires billions in capital, long-term partnerships, and control over data and hardware pipelines. Investors are increasingly backing companies that build the picks and shovels of the ecosystem, compute, storage, and model training infrastructure, rather than just flashy applications. This is a new phase where the winners won't be the fastest to prototype but the ones able to operate AI at industrial scale. In this environment, funding is no longer just fuel for growth, it's a moat that determines who can compete at all.
All right, Delilah, it's funny that you said a phrase earlier that Copilot actually said picks and shovels. And so curious to hear your thoughts, hot off the press. What did you think about what Copilot had to say?
Yeah, no, 100%. This is, again, I would say last year, the first wave of, or last couple of years, wave of funding for AI was the race to the applications, the race to the consumer, like the OpenAI, the Anthropic, et cetera, the Claude, everybody. And now that feels like there are some already known winners in that and continue to be. Now it's like really, but how are we going to support this sustainably as a planet, really, as well as in our businesses, right? And so this infrastructure that Copilot is talking about is exactly it, and that is where, for sure, now there's massive capex, required around, data centers and infrastructure and power, and so, like on TSX, one of our companies, Hammond Power, they're, a 100-year-old company that just, it was a utility. And now they're doing so well because they are literally supplying the power to the grid, right? Specifically for data centers. So it's this kind of infrastructure. Those are the kind of companies, when I talk to investors, are looking at, where are those wins going to be? who's going to be able to supply this power, this infrastructure for long term? And so, yeah, I 100% agree with this. We're definitely seeing this on our market.
I really thought that it leaned more towards the supply of the supply and demand structure, and wanted to hear more on the demand side, because on our end, I think it's because the AI chicks with the podcasts and our workshops and everything that we're doing, we're at the front lines of the consumer and the user. And so when I think about demand, we come across so many more people that they're not fully using AI just yet. And so I'm curious, with your positioning, do you feel like the demand is more of the tech industry driving the demand versus the users and consumers driving the demand at this stage?
Gosh, that's a great question. I'm not sure I have the answer to that. I would say from where a lot of the capital is going, there's definitely, again, this interest in that infrastructure. Now we're going to see, right? We're going to see with these big IPOs, these mega IPOs coming in the US this year with SpaceX, raising upwards 75 billion, valued at almost 2 trillion, OpenAI, Anthropic, so, SpaceX, they have the infrastructure, right? This is the Starlink. That's what's really driving a lot of their valuation. So that is pure infrastructure. But then OpenAI and Anthropic, that's more on the application side. So we'll see, we'll see how those IPOs play out. Certainly in the capital markets, it's going to suck a lot of capital out of the market when those three go. But let's see how investors really respond to those kinds of IPOs, whether it's infrastructure or if it's pure application.
When I heard what Copilot had to say, these LLMs are getting a bit more bold in their statements and positions. I'll tell you, we've been doing this podcast for a while. And usually when we ask it for AI's take across all of the different LLMs, they usually take a very neutral position.
Yeah.
So Copilot was just like, we need to build all the infrastructure and it's all about infrastructure or bust. And it was very funny for us to just see how the large language models are also evolving in terms of how they respond to our
their
same
positioning.
prompt. Yeah. However, I do think that obviously infrastructure is important, but what was interesting for me though is that when you think about the fact that they're focusing on supply, it's because they are using predictive analysis, I imagine, for what they assume is going to be the demand in the future, because data centers is not something you can just wave a wand and make a data center happen. It takes months and months of construction and putting things together. So for them to have what they imagine they need, they're thinking about, what do we need in 5 years? What do we need in 10 years? And they're trying to build towards that. The question though, that we were talking about is like, is it also a generational shift, right? Because Gen Alpha is also starting to use AI. So yes, I do think that the biggest players are the tech companies because they're using it to fuel their models. But also, is it that they're also projecting that the consumer is going to only increasingly use
that the demand in the future will happen? Because again, like, we're at the front lines of these workshops, these courses, and just with our platform, asking us a lot of questions about AI, about implementation of it. And we're still seeing a lot of hesitation on the front lines of that. It's the
millennials and older.
That's why it's super interesting to see, like, on the supply side, the growth that's happening, but it still hasn't trickled down just yet to the masses. But there is, this predictive element to it that the industry would technically need to get ahead.
Yeah, but one other thing I think that we risk not talking about is how much AI and infrastructure is related to defense in this country now. And so, because significant amount of dollars are obviously being put, by the administration toward national security, and all this infrastructure in AI is part of that, right? So that our governments, our banks, our military are not hacked, right? And so there is, I would say that in the last 6 to 8 months, maybe 6 to 9 months, I've seen a significant number now of companies that are really, if you want to get significant funding now in any of these sectors, you need to talk about the dual use of whatever you're creating that is also has an application towards some level of the government or military. And so that has been a significant trend. And certainly anything with AI, cybersecurity, any of the stuff, clean energy, all of that is relevant, in this AI, quantum computing, all of the things. And so I would say that the companies I'm seeing that are getting funded, they are very smart to include and obviously go after applications that can be used for some type of defense.
I'm glad that you brought that up because we've had those conversations. We've had episodes about national security and AI, but I think that it's important for our listeners to also know it's like, we're not just talking about AI and tech in this vacuum. One of the things about AI is that it's a global race and there is this geopolitical component to it as well. So Delilah, I'm glad that you brought that point up.
Yeah. And you were also sort of segue into one of the things that I was planning on bringing up for AI founders and startups today. What are those key things that they need to make sure are in their structure, workflow, and pitch for investment? Because you mentioned you get a ton of pitches. And so it's good to know for AI founders out there, you need to also be thinking about the applications when it comes to government, civil, and security. Any other insights that you could give us on that topic as well?
Yeah, I would say it's really important for any founders looking to raise capital in this space right now. There's kind of three things that I kind of was thinking about. One of the things is that clear path to cash flow. So for those companies that are making the big bets and they're serial entrepreneurs and they have backing, because even though there's a lot of venture capital going, like 50% of VC money last year went to AI, but 75% of that went to the mega deals, right? Like deals over 100 million. So these are, experienced CEOs already, and they're getting the capital. So those earlier stage founders, how do you, break in, to get that capital? So that clear path to cash flow, which also shows that you actually have a viable business model, right? I mean, you're not just creating an application and hope that someone's going to use it. And also because of the sustainability requirement now with AI moving so fast, how fast can you get to revenue? How fast can you get to profitability? Do you have real customers? Like, I would focus on that. And then I would also, as this is obviously a big thing, is, what is that regulatory and ethical foresight, right? So making sure that that's baked into anything around AI. If you are really in any sector, but if you're in, health tech, there's a lot of stuff happening around biotech. Really be thinking about, the privacy and ethical considerations. That's a big debate, obviously throughout AI. So I would do that. And then the last thing I would say is, make sure you have what I just kind of call that full stack team. So it's not just coders, it's not just data scientists, right? So as we moved, more and more into artificial intelligence, but the human component of it is going to be so critical. So on your team, again, this also, goes back to the question of ethics, right? Do you have humans on your team as well as the coders that are thinking about all the possible positives and negatives of whatever you're building and whatever industry you're going to disrupt? So those are things I would say. So that, clear path to cash flow, regulatory, ethical foresight, and the full stack team.
I love that you said the clear path to cash flow. As an M&A advisor, tech is very different from other industries. So in different industries, when you're going to, whether they're trying to raise capital or they are trying to sell their business, their financial metrics are very important. And it needs to be like, you have revenue growth year over year, you have profitability, you are stable. With tech, a lot of investors will be investing on the future probability of it hitting certain marks. So it's a very different way to calibrate investing. And so what I think was interesting about what you were saying about the apps, because it's becoming faster to build apps and it is also lowering the cost of doing so. Now these applications have to hit the business metrics, I think, earlier than they have historically had to do before.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that because, again, we're just in these capital markets where, again, a lot of money is going to go to a few companies. And so the remaining capital, who gets that capital? So if you are at revenue, if you have a clear path to profitability, then you're going to have a higher chance of getting that remaining capital, right? And especially, and I know we're going to talk about female founders, if you're a female founder, you already have it stacked against you just in terms of just the reality of people invest in who and what they know. And a lot of the capital is still coming from men. So how do you create your advantage? How do you stand out? And it's really around having, like you said, a true product market fit and a true business that has a business model where you are making money and you have a high chance of scaling, and that you're not relying on some of these technologies that, to your point, the barrier to entry into all this stuff is way lower. I mean, so the good news is way, less expensive to start some of these businesses, but it also means that anyone else can do it too.
Yeah, definitely makes it more of a competitive market. With that said, what are you tired of hearing from these AI founders? I'm sure you've heard it all. So what are you and the investors like? Please don't ever say this again.
Yeah, I would say that one thing is when they say we are unique in using AI for this, right? And so no one's unique in using AI for anything anymore, right? And so it's really then flipping that is to this is how we're leveraging AI in the most effective way to disrupt the industry that we're doing. And always going back to whatever that problem you're solving, that there's a real problem and that you are leveraging all the tools. That's just a given at this point that you're using it for your business. But then, people would say like, oh, we're the Uber of AI or we're this of AI, right? And so it's like, it's that's just not unique anymore. And so you need to stand out again to get access to that capital. And so how do you do that? By leveraging the tools.
From where you sit in your work on the Toronto Stock Exchange, you're talking to all of these different CEOs of all these different companies. You're seeing where the money is being invested. You did touch on women-led businesses trying to get funding. What are your thoughts on that? Has things changed for women founders? Do you see more women founders coming to the table now with technology and AI, giving them more opportunities? I'd love to hear your perspective on, are women getting more funding or having more opportunities at the table?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I have a unique perspective because, yes, I work in the public markets where very few women take their companies public. So in my work, I see very few female CEOs that are driving toward a public exit. And there's lots of reasons from that in terms of the whole system, from friends and family to angel to VC all the way up to the public markets, was not built for women. So there is a challenge. We know the stats around venture capital that 2 to 3% is going to women. I do run, because I'm very passionate about this personally. I do run a global accelerator with UBS out of Europe, and I currently am teaching 130 female founders on how to raise their first venture capital. And so this is the topic. And there's a lot of founders in technology and fintech, and almost all of them are using AI in some way. And so how do those founders get that capital? Now, there is some good news in terms of the AI money. Companies with at least one female co-founder are getting like a decent amount. Like I think it's up to 40% actually, if I saw the latest stat on that, within AI. So there are definitely more women in tech, more women in AI, because the AI has democratized the ability to create these businesses, et cetera. As we know, for female founders to get funded and close that funding gap, we just need more women to be investors, right? And so I'd say, yes, there is a bit more money going to women who are in AI specifically, because that's where all the capital is going. And that percentage actually seems to be higher than just the average. And you still have to play with the reality of being a female founder and just getting, access to capital overall.
Would you also say that specifically, as we were talking about with AI and that picks and shovels market, a lot of women are also not necessarily in that sector of tech, right? And so if that's where a boom is happening with investments or a shift is happening in focus of capital markets, then that's also playing into a factor of it.
Yeah, I definitely don't know the data on that, but I mean, that just intuitively makes sense. And certainly when I think in my mind of all the infrastructure companies that I'm talking to, or those related to defense use, et cetera, there's no women in any of those. This is just my personal experience. It doesn't mean that they aren't. I know in Europe, because I'm teaching a number of European female founders that are more focused on infrastructure related to clean energy. So, clean tech, clean energy. And so a lot of women create impact companies globally. And so there definitely are women who are playing, I would say, in the infrastructure around that kind of energy, like the clean tech, clean energy, from what I've seen. But again, whether they're going to get that capital or not, that's to be determined.
If women invested more in women-led AI companies, what is your prediction on how that would impact the economy over, let's say, the next decade or so?
Yeah. And again, this is just my personal opinion, not the opinion of TSX, but this is twofold for me. One, investing in AI companies, especially AI companies led by women, because we need the democratization, with the technology. I'm sure a lot of your guests are talking about this around we all need to be at the table of creating a tool that will have a massive impact on all of humanity, right? And so there's already the concern that there's a few people in the world that are literally creating this technology and giving access to this technology, and that is very concerning. And so I just want equal representation at that table, including women, including people of color, including different perspectives, et cetera. But then the other fold is, just investing in women-led businesses, period, and especially AI, if that's what's getting funded, that's what's going to change humanity, because we just want more women to have to build wealth, generational wealth, to move some of those philanthropic dollars into investing, to create that wealth, and then really to have economic power, because that is still how our world is run. And so we want to make the changes we want to see in the world. I believe is going to come through economic power by having a balanced perspective at the table, which we still clearly do not at all have.
That's what had stood out to me and why I circled back around to the picks and shovels aspect a little bit earlier in the conversation, because when it comes to investing, I actually personally focus a lot in that sector of the AI industry. And so even in my research and looking into those companies, the supply side, I was also noticing the excruciating, painful gap of who's a part of those companies. And yeah, it's very few women. And so that's why as we talk about women in AI, women in tech, and then with growth, market growth and boom, there is a whole other sector, the supply side, that I think women should take a second look of maybe seeing what your ideas and what your businesses can help service on that end as well too.
But I think too, something that Delilah said that I think is worth noting is part of this conversation is also the society and the cultural aspect of it, because historically when women get together, we're usually talking about other things.
Yes.
It could be family, it could be friends. We're, talking about emotional dynamics. And I'm not trying to overgeneralize, but I'm just saying that it's no surprise that men usually get together and they're talking about sports and they're talking about money and they're talking about what they're investing in. And this is just, if you put two groups of people and you separated them, there's natural conversational topics. So something Aisha and I have talked about is when we get together with our friends, we want to talk about AI. We want to talk about investing, changing the conversation, but that's something that has to be kind of rolled out and initiated.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you mentioned starting an SPV with your women's circle, because we've actually been talking and planning that with our circle of female friends as well too, because we always hear about the SPV bros, SVP bros.
We're like the SPV chicks need
What you mentioned is just, also encouraging us and inspiring us that, what we've been talking about with our circle of ladies, we're going in the right direction. So thanks, Delilah.
Yeah.
Thanks for co-signing what we've been talking about.
And I sit here very aware of my white woman privilege. Listen, I come from a small town in the prairies of Canada, so I've come a long way. But because I'm, a white woman in the capital markets, of which there are very few women, right? But I recognize my privilege of just being in this space. So I have access to deal flow, right? Because again, what do founders, investors need? They need knowledge and they need access, right? So I actually am in the world of funds and investing. And so I get to see all the cool investment opportunities, right? I'm sure like you, I've been invited, into the pre-IPO for SpaceX and OpenAI and Anthropic, but most of my people are not. Mine of my friends are not. So when I decided to do the SPV, because I wanted to move some of my money into these funds and give it to professional women investors that are investing in companies that I actually care about. But I wanted to bring along my girlfriends that don't have this access. They would never meet a VC fund. Like one of my best friends is a pilot at Delta. She's an accredited investor, but she's just investing out of her 401k, right? Or maybe some crypto or Robinhood or whatever, but she's not getting access to these early stage, exciting, being part of a fund. And hopefully in 8 to 10 years, this turns into something really magical for all of us. So that's one of the motivators for me is I just want more women, like you said, to talk about money. I talk about money all the time, to make these investments, to move some of their dollars, like I said, from philanthropy to investing. So we create that real generational wealth and we have, access to that economic power.
Delilah, thank you so much for giving us that insight. We do need to play
the nickname game.
The nickname game.
We do.
So, Delilah, every episode we give our guests a nickname to induct them into the AI squad. With that at the topic, do you have a nickname?
So one of the things I do is I actually volunteer in prisons for men and women on their really brilliant entrepreneur programs, and we have to choose a name, and I'm always called Delightful Delilah. So I'm happy if that's all I am in the world is just
Delightful Delilah.
delightful. I'm happy to be Delightful Delilah to in any room I'm in.
Yes.
Oh, you know what? You have
official.
been. And
It's
you are
official.
Delightful Delilah. So that is actually a perfect name. Welcome to the AI Squad, Delightful Delilah.
Yes. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, as we come to a close, any key takeaways that you would like for our listeners and audience to know?
Yeah, and this relates back to like how we started, how critical it is for all founders to look at all their options for accessing capital. And so I know here in the US as Toronto Stock Exchange, we're a unique and unusual, concept to think about going north of the border to get that capital to come back here in the US. But whether I'm talking to early stage female founders or later stage, founders who are looking to take their companies public, it's really my thing for founders is know all of your options, public, private, debt, equity, whatever it is, because we are in a world of just really interesting dynamic times. The markets are very dynamic. Again, with these huge IPOs coming, where's the capital for the rest of the companies? So I would just say that really every founder, look at all your options, whatever sector you're in, especially in AI, and look for some non-traditional options like Toronto Stock Exchange for a US company. But there are a lot of options to raise capital. And as the CEO, you really need to know them to make sure that you make an educated decision about what's right for you and your company, and the life that you're actually trying to create.
Well, we are so thankful for you to dropping those gems for us. We're so thankful to have you on our podcast. And we want to give also major appreciation to TechCon conference for connecting us. And we are looking forward to seeing you there.
I'll be there. I look forward to meeting you in person as well. Thank you so much for your time and your energy for all this. This is really, really special what you're doing. So thank you.
Now that I'm on a roll with thank yous, want to thank you guys for listening and tuning in. Make sure to subscribe. And what else, Lana?
Don't forget to grab the merch.
All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Listen to the AI Chicks on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Video episodes are available on Patreon. And check out our socials at The AI Chicks.